last year, which is pretty awesome. So we've got Ben Friedman with his standard summer gear on.
Yeah, and Ben Friedman actually has a full 4-color Delver
Oh,
deck.
is it a full 4?
This isn't Grixis with just
we got Abrupticase.
Deathrite Shaman. This isn't Sultai. This is full 4-color.
Full 4 colors. So hopefully, I wonder if he's been able to draw 4 cards with his Painful Truths against Athalia yet.
That would be very cool. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the matchup, basically Jonathan Morawski is going to be looking to reanimate some huge creature on the first couple turns of the game, preferably as soon as turn 1 or 2. As soon as he gets to turn 3 or 4, things are going to start turning in favor of Ben. And Ben is basically going to be looking to do the Delver thing, disrupt his opponent, and then put a clock on him.
So Jonathan's going to start off with a Thoughtseize here. Ben is going to use a Spell Pierce to stop it. Let's see if Jonathan decides to turn up some action here on turn 2. He's just going to pass the turn back.
And we were kind of, joking around about how Ben was only playing 2 Tarmogoyfs. It looks like he just had only a certain number of slots in his deck for threats. And by having, instead of playing 4 Tarmogoyfs, by having a split of 2 Tarmogoyfs and 2 True Name Nemesis, this means that he has 2 threats that are blue cards that he can pitch to Force of Will, meaning that he can slant his deck to be a little bit more disruptive against combo decks and a little bit more aggressive towards fair decks. So that's kind of a nice little piece of deck building, and I think that's why he has that split.
All right, so we have an Entomb coming from Jonathan Morawski on Ben's end step after he plays a Delver of Secrets. He's going to fetch down to 19, use a Spell Pierce to try and stop it. Jonathan is going to fall down to 18 and use a Force of Will to try and counter that Spell Pierce. If he's fighting over the Entomb, it means that he has multiple pieces of, multiple reanimation type spells in his hand, and we could see a Grizzle Brand next turn, and this 4-color Delver deck is probably going to have a tough time beating Grizzle Brand.
Oh, yeah. Jonathan does want this Grizzle Brand to hit earlier rather than later. One thing that's interesting about this Reanimator deck that's different than the Show and Tell deck is Jonathan can get to a situation where he's not dead, but his life total is too low for him to cast Reanimate. So that's one of the things that's a little fragile about this Reanimator deck, and why we don't see it quite as frequently as Sneak and Show is because it, while it is a little bit more favored on the first 3 turns of the game, it's has an even harder time winning after that point. So it's a pretty high variance deck.
All right, so Ben's going to fall to 18, going to fetch out another dual land and cast a Brainstorm. Looks like he has Dazed True Name Nemesis in hand. He's looking for another copy of Force of Will. He does not find it.
And it's always tricky to figure out what to fight against with these Reanimator decks because they generally have around equal parts reanimate spells and spells that put creatures in your graveyard.
The enablers.
And so it's tricky to figure out which ones you're supposed to fight over.
In general, I like fighting over the enablers just because once an enabler resolves, then you have to stop every single one of the reanimate spells afterwards. And it's most of the time, I don't want to say most of the time, but it's likely that the enablers are generally what you want to fight over.
And the Grizzle Father has hit the graveyard.
Oh, Grizzle Brand.
I love this card. This is one of my favorite cards to put into play.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that draw 7 on, like drawing 7 cards is what you don't want to be doing.
Yeah.
He's also going to Brainstorm here on the end step. This is pretty smart because this is going to try and bait Ben into using a Daze if he has it, but also give John another look, or extra looks at finding a land or a Lotus Petal to try and be able to pay for a Daze with this the Exhumes that he has in hand.
Yeah, and it also just uses his mana efficiently. This is what he wants to do.
Well, it uses his mana efficiently, but this isn't a very effective Brainstorm.
Sure. This Reanimate deck, it's not necessarily... well, it's just all about speed.
Yeah.
It really needs to win on the first 3 turns of the game.
It doesn't really matter that he's giving up some Brainstorm equity, since all he's looking for at that point is just a mana source to play around Daze.
Yeah, and he can discard all the cards in the world so long as he gets Grizzle Brand into play, because then he can draw all the cards in the world.
Yep, so we're going to draw 7 here. Going to fall down to 11. He has a Force of Will, so this is going to give him some blue cards to be able to pitch to Force of Wills. It'll allow him to do a little discard action.
And the world is his oyster. The main deck, Delver deck's not going to have any way to deal with this. Maybe you'll see some fringe case scenarios where a Delver deck may have like a 1-of Vapor Snag, but generally speaking, that's not going to be the case.
Yep.
Now, if we had been slightly later in this matchup, we may be in a situation where Ben has a Tarmogoyf and, let's say, a Deathrite Shaman in play, and there's some room for him to actually race a 7/7 lifelinker. But considering that we're still earlier in the game and Jonathan has been able to do it at a nice life total of 11, I think this is probably going to be game over for Ben, and we're just going to be going through the motions.
Ben's going to flip his Delver of Secrets into an Insectile Aberration by revealing a Ponder. We're going to get a Brainstorm from Ben. Got a bunch of sweet cards in his hand. Delver of Secrets, Brainstorm, Daze, Training Nemesis. They don't do much against the 7/7 flying lifelinking Yawgmoth Bargain.
a lot of good cards, but none of them do much in this situation.
Grizzle Brand is real unfair. And I play with it a lot, and I still think it's pretty unfair.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Did you play very much Legacy before Grizzle Brand? When the card in the Reanimator decks was Jin-Kataxis?
I remember helping Ian and Reed prepare for tournaments when they were playing really early versions of Reanimator, but they didn't have enough cards to build me a Legacy deck, so I didn't actually compete during that time period.
So the Reanimator decks there with Jin-Kataxis is the card is less powerful than Grizzle Brand, but it's also just like much less fun to play against.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, well, you get to draw 7, but you also just you empty my hand on my end step. That's not fun.
Yeah, it also is a little bit harder for the Reanimator deck to close the game out from that point also.
It's much worse than Grizzle Brand, but it's also much less fun to play. At least with Grizzle Brand, you kind of get this illusion that you have a chance.
It really is an illusion,
It still doesn't affect your hand. But yeah, it really is an illusion.
There are some corner case scenarios, though, where Ben is able to develop a board, maybe chump block Grizzle Brand for a turn with a flip Delver and race back. But, this unfortunately is not one of those games, although that does sometimes come up.
And there's a very good chance that we just see Elishnorn enter the battlefield this turn, and that will put a fork in Ben. He's done.
Yeah, after drawing 14 cards, you might as well just combo off again if you can.
Yeah, why not? All right, well, we're going to discard Elishnorn and a land. All right, well, we got another Exhume, so might as well put this one onto the battlefield.
Yeah, if I wasn't winning by a large enough margin, I'd like to win by a little bit more.
Yeah. All right, Exhume, what do you got, Ben Friedman?
I will kill both your guys and put an unbeatable monster onto the board.
A second unbeatable monster onto the board. Well, Spell Pierce.
Ben's fighting the good fight. Can't blame him for trying.
John's going to fall down to 10. He's going to pay for the Spell Pierce. All right, Ben's going to Daze. I anticipate a Force of Will out of Jonathan.
I imagine Ben putting that Daze on the board and saying, "Take that."
Oh, we're just going to get a Daze from Jonathan. And Elishnorn is going to cause Ben to enter into his scoop phase. Jonathan Morawski is going to take game 1 here in the 9th round of play. Final round of day 1. It's going to move on. Well, it hasn't won yet, but we're going to move on to the sideboarded games. It's going to take game 1 with Reanimator over 4-color Delver on Ben Friedman. Let's take a look at their sideboards. Jonathan has 3 Abrupt Decay, 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigy, a Flusterstorm of Duress, a Coffin Purge, 2 Pithy Needle, 2 Show and Tell, 1 Ionis Shield of Emeria, 1 Disfigure, and 1 copy of Ashen Rider. What do you think he's going to bring in here?
So one of the cards that this Reanimator deck is really worried about are cards like Tormod's Crypt or Grafdigger's Cage, which Ben doesn't have, but there's a good chance that Jonathan will be worried about that and to bring in Abrupt Decays. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is a nice card to bring in, considering that Ben is probably going to take a lot of his removal out, although there there could be potential pyroblasts that would go against that. I think that Jonathan will likely bring in an address to fight through the extra counter magic that Ben is likely to have. Pithing Needle can be a good answer to Deathrite Shaman. Show and Tell can be a nice way to make it so that he's not so reliant on his graveyard. And I don't think he's going to bring in Iona or Ashen Rider, but just figure it can also be another way that he can interact with Deathrite Shaman. So Jonathan has a lot of options. I don't think he'll bring in all of these cards, but typically the Reanimator deck gets a lot worse after sideboard because it is so weak to specific hate cards. So we may see many of those mentioned cards.
And now on Ben's side, we have 2 Pithing Needle, 4 copies of Surgical Extraction. Holy moly.
Yeah,
he also has 3
commitment.
Snapcaster Mages in his deck. He was ready for Jonathan Morawski.
Yep.
2 Flusterstorm, 2 Thoughtseize, 1 Dismember, 2 Umezawa's Jite, and 2 copies of Painful Truce. How do we think Ben Friedman's going to side here?
Well, the Surgical Extractions are definitely coming in, but I would just like to know.
How many?
Yeah, all 4.
All of them?
All of them, yeah.
I mean, you don't play 4 Surgicals to not bring in 4 Surgicals against the Reanimator deck,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really going to catch Jonathan by surprise because the typical graveyard hate comes in the form of Grafdigger's Cages, Tormod's Crypts. So I think these Surgicals are going to be really effective. Also, Flusterstorm, Thoughtseize are likely to come in just to have more combo disruption, and I think that's going to be about it.
A big point here is that Jonathan didn't see any Snapcaster Mages out of Ben, and that's the one super unique card in his build, and he's going to be able to take big advantage of Surgical Extraction. Ben's list is pretty teched out, and you can read about all different types of tech for your decks on the StarCityGames.com newsletter.
Ooh, nice.
Absolutely free to sign up. It is your source for Magic the Gathering news. You can get the latest on the SCG Tour. You can watch the SCG Tour Match of the Week. You can receive exclusive deck lists and advice, catch up on all the event results, and even read an exclusive Cardboard Crack comic. Absolutely free to sign up. Go.starcitygames.com/newsletter.
Yeah, it's great.
You wrote for this before, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've written for it, you've written for it.
Yeah.
We've had Craig Crumples write for it, we've had a lot of great people write for it, and it's just one of the easiest way to catch up on the week's highlights. If you're only going to read one thing, that would probably be the one thing to read.
And it's free.
Oh yeah, free's good. Love free.
All right, so our players here are going to draw their opening hands for Game 2. For those of you just now joining us, Jonathan Morawski is up 1-0 with Reanimator against Ben Friedman, who is on 4-color Delver. We saw a very early Grizzle Brand enter the battlefield and close things out in short order. The winner of this match is going to move on to 8-1 and put themselves in a very good position to try and top 8 this event. Whoever does not win this match will still make it to Day 2 at 7-2, but they won't have very many losses to give up on the next day if they're wanting to top 8.
You know, one of the things I'm most excited about this matchup is the presence of Jace Vryn's Prodigy. This is a card that people have talked a lot about being good in Legacy and Modern. We haven't seen it a whole lot, but this is, I think, one of the situations where it could be at its best, and I would really like to see it do some serious work here. If Jonathan has brought in those Abrupt Decays, he can flash them back. Jace works really well with the Plan A of Reanimator and putting creatures into the graveyard and reanimating them. So that's going to be one of the things that I'm most interested in seeing this match.
Yeah, I know that Cedric was pretty high on Reanimator for a while in Legacy, and it was a big proponent of Jace Vryn's Prodigy in his Reanimator decks. So both players are just going to play land go for a couple of turns. Jonathan did play a Lotus Petal on turn 1 just to kind of see what Ben was going to do. He let it resolve. Ben's going to try and ponder here on his 3rd turn. Ooh, there is a Surgical Extraction, one of the many.
One of the 4.
He also has one in his hand, along with the Snapcaster Mage. So this might be one of those show and tell type matchups for Jonathan.
Yep. And you can see that Ben Friedman's hand is just a wall of counter magic. He would really like to get a Delver onto the board and then never tap out again after that.
Yeah. Here's an Entomb. This could spell bad news for Jonathan Morawski. Now, I played Reanimator for a bit, particularly when Jeskai Stoneblade was very popular during the pre-Treasure Cruise and Big Three Time. I really like the show and tell aspect of this Reanimator deck. I beat a lot of Jeskai decks when they had Rest in Peace on the battlefield, and they just looked bewildered.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because the Reanimator deck, it's not that common. It's pretty common for show and tell to be in the sideboard, but when you're looking at a sideboard card in a matchup that you don't play often, even something that's like essentially a staple in the sideboard may be something that you're unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Grizzle Brand, Jonathan's going to get a Grizzle Brand. Ben's just going to pass the turn, or Ben's still going to let him resolve it, and
Jonathan's probably thinking, step one complete. I've got a Grizzle Brand in my graveyard. This is good news. And Ben Friedman is saying, now you have fallen into my trap. And we see that with Jonathan going for the Reanimate, Ben Friedman essentially has a free counterspell in the form of Surgical Extraction that has huge repercussions for potentially getting rid of every Grizzle Brand that's in Jonathan's deck and potentially his hand too.
So we've got a Brainstorm response from Jonathan. Now, even if he were to counter this, if Ben has a Snapcaster Mage, he can just use a Snapcaster Mage.
Yep. Yeah, this could be a game-winning move on Ben Friedman's part.
Yeah, depending on what other threats Jonathan has brought in, I mean, this could just be game. Now, he does have 4 mana available. If he decided to keep the Grave Titan in, he could just play Grave Titan on 6. And I don't know if this Delver deck can beat a Grave Titan.
Probably not. Maybe we'll see a Jace Ultimate. That would be wild.
Yeah?
That would be wild. That would be extremely unlikely also. So this is going to be tough.
Well, he is going to get a free shuffle on his deck, at the very least, from that Surgical Extraction.
Yeah, it's a very small consolation prize.
Oh, we got 3/7. He can just play this Elish Norn in 2 turns.
Wow.
Ben does have a Force of Will, though.
Yeah, Jonathan has a very weak hand, unfortunately.
Ooh, it looks like he didn't side out of Grizzle Brand. There's still 4.
Yeah, and this is one of the nice things about Surgical Extraction is you get to take a peek at everything that's going on in your opponent's deck. And I did see 2 of the show and tells. I believe I saw Jace also.
Yep.
Is there a Tide Spout Tyrant? Yeah, that was from the main.
Tide Spout Tyrant. There's also a Grave Titan.
Mm-hmm. Ben's counting up the mana to see when a Grave Titan could potentially be online. Yeah, Surgical Extraction is a card that you really don't see that often. Like I was saying, the most common forms of Graveyard Hate are Grafdigger's Cage, Deathrite Shaman, Scavenging Ooze, Relic of Progenitus, maybe Tormod's Crypt, but Surgical Extraction has kind of fallen out of favor. The fact that it's a 0 mana spell, though, means that if it's become unpopular, it's probably a good time to bring it back because the surprise value of it is so potent.
Yeah, it's generally played in Delver-style decks that have access to Snapcaster Mage.
Yep.
And it's also played in some of the Grixis Delver decks, since it works fairly well with like Cabal Therapy type cards. And Young Pyromancer, just another free spell. Yeah. Oh, Ben is going to deploy a True Name Nemesis here. I choose you.
Yep.
Protection.
So not the most efficient threat here.
7-turn clock.
Still very good. Really, I mean, it clocks his opponent just as fast as a Delver. Doesn't get tagged by Disfigure or Abrupt Decay. And now Ben can just sit back on this counter wall and just make sure that Jonathan can't do what he wants to do.
And he has another Surgical Extraction that he drew after leaving it there on top from the Ponder.
And this has got to have Jonathan really worried. Fighting through a Surgical Extraction is not what you would expect, and probably the worst case scenario for a Reanimator deck. At least when someone has Grafdigger's Cage, it doesn't actually wipe out your graveyard, and you can potentially interact with it with Abrupt Decay.
Yeah.
But Surgical Extraction's a lot trickier.
So we might just see a hard cast Elish Norn here.
It would dodge a lot of the permissions, such as Spell Pierce, Flusterstorm, Pyroblast if Ben had it, but it will get tagged by
Daze or Force of Will.
right.
I don't know if Daze has ever countered an Elishnorn, but it's just about to. Boom.
And with tight play, Ben floats a mana before returning the island to his hand.
That's pretty good.
And Jonathan has to know that that is unlikely to resolve, but things aren't getting any better for him.
You got it dry.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see land Grave Titan.
And this is really how the Reanimator deck essentially lives and dies. It tries to do something on the first 3 turns of the game. It either succeeds or fails, and essentially there's no second shot after that. Sometimes they make some sort of an attempt, but that's usually what it comes down to. And Ben just has it all. Notably, this True Name Nemesis does attack through a Grave Titan. Doesn't necessarily race it, but can attack through it.
That is one of the things that it can do.
Yeah.
All right, Jonathan's going to draw for his turn. We've got a Careful Study.
And the Reanimator deck, it's a fast and powerful combo, but for the most part, it operates on a card advantage deficit. Cards like Careful Study, Reanimate, Entomb, these cards are not particularly good when it comes to card advantage. A lot of them, like Careful Study, you're down a card after you play it.
Well, here's a Show and Tell from Ben. He's going to catch a Spell Pierce.
And did Jonathan actually have something to put into play? I don't think he did. I think that Show and Tell was a pure bluff, and now he's going for a Reanimator. Great play on Jonathan's part. Really, really good.
But Ben does have another copy of Surgical Extraction that's going to take Elishnorn.
Brutal. Jonathan really has done everything he could to do that. I really like that Show and Tell, even though he had nothing to play.
Yeah, it's very smart.
It was just to bait out some counter magic so that he could go for a Reanimate afterwards.
All right, well, Jonathan is going to scoop him up. Ben is going to take the second game here with a back-breaking Surgical Extraction, one of the 4 in his sideboard. Do you think that we're going to see any changes here, or is Ben happy with the cards that he's brought in?
I think Ben is super happy with the cards he's brought in. I think another thing to note about that just really quickly is that Ben's draw was 1 dedicated threat and then all permission. A lot of times things won't line up that way, and Jonathan almost battled through everything Ben had, so that was actually quite the close match. If Ben had an extra Delver or Tarmogoyf, we may be looking at a win for Jonathan.
I could see that. Now, one of the unique cards in Ben's deck is Snapcaster Mage.
Yep, great card.
The 2 pins that we're wearing
Oh, I see where you're
are
going.
Snapcaster Mage.
Man, your bridges are on fire.
And you can check out here our creature collection, where you can get playmats, sleeves, and player bundles now. Go to StarCityGames.com/creature collection. We've got Snapcaster Mage, art done beautifully by the very talented Andrea Radek in Star City headquarters. And we also have the Fruit Bat. So I only had 1 submission that I saw.
Yeah, it was Flappy.
Flappy the Fruit Bat. Mm-hmm. I don't like it, unfortunately.
I like it, but I want some more suggestions.
I want something better. So feel free to hit us up with what you think this Fruit Bat should be named. You can tag Andy and I. We could even just do a hashtag Fruit Bat or something so that I can search it to be able to see it. Hashtag Fruit Bat, and help us name this Fruit Bat. It's real cute.
Yeah, I would love to see a pun specifically with watermelon.
Same.
That would be cool.
But again, these are available now. Playmat sleeves and player bundles. Go to StarCityGames.com/creature collection to get yours. You too can have the awesome Snapcaster Mage at your side, much like Ben Friedman has the awesome Snapcaster Mage. Let's learn a little bit more about him. He's not just all sleeveless shirts. He has cowboy hats as well. He is 23 years old.
Man of style.
Baltimore, Maryland. He has 8 open top 8s with 1 win, 4 invitational top 8s. Hasn't been able to close one out yet. He is good friends with fellow Magic players Alexander Magellan, Joe Demestrio, and Christian Calcano. Got the nickname 40 Card Freeman because he used to dislike playing limited. And he blogs about topics in philosophy.
Interesting. I'll have to check out the blog.
Generally philosophy having to do with how awesome cowboy hats are and patterned shirts with tractors on them.
Are you for real?
No.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be surprised. Ben is a nice guy. He's extremely intelligent. I enjoy every interaction
cool.
that I have with him. Jonathan Morawski is also a pretty nice guy.
Yeah, super nice guy.
He's very good at Magic, and he was in the Players' Championship last year.
Yeah,
which is pretty awesome. Let's see if we can learn a little bit more about him as these players finish up shuffling. He's 33 years young, from Douglas, MA. Is that Massachusetts? Hometown? Yeah, hometown. Yeah. Hometown boy here by Worcester.
Yep.
He has 3 open top 8s. I don't know if Douglas is near Worcester or not. He once worked as a navigator on board a boat that traveled the Arctic Circle.
That's really sweet.
He owns a flock of chickens, and he loves smoothies.
Sweet.
I too love a good smoothie.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a smoothie fan?
Oh yeah.
What is your favorite smoothie flavor?
Mango.
Mango?
Yeah.
Respectable. I like strawberry banana. or anything with peanut butter.
Yeah, Jonathan's a player that I'm particularly interested also because he's been doing fairly well over the past maybe year or two in the Northeast. But it seems like the amount that he's been playing and the success he's had has been picking up more and more. And I'm curious to see if he's going to become, one of the real mainstays of the Open Tour.
Yeah, well, I know he was able to get enough points through traveling the Northeast and playing in IQs.
Yep.
To get into the Players' Championship last year. The system has been redesigned, with more focus being on the SCG Tour stops. And he's making an attempt to get out and play in those when he can, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and he's doing well. He's here 7-1 with Reanimator, which is kind of a fringe strategy. And it looks like he's entombing for Grave Titan, and I think that might be a nod to the potential of surgical extraction. He doesn't want to endanger Grizzle Brand if he doesn't have to.
Yeah, I mean, Grave Titan is going to win the game just as well as Grizzle Brand is, maybe even faster, to be honest. I'm fine with him going and getting the Grave Titan. I also like just the main phase Entomb.
Yeah, it plays around days.
It does play around days. It allows him to daze an extraction if Ben doesn't wait until his turn to use one, which it looks like he has one in his hand. Of course, he boarded in 4 of them.
He's always going to have one.
But he's just going to play a Tropical Island and pass back to Jonathan. Let's see what he decides to do. He's not going to pull the trigger yet. He's just going to play a Pluto Delta and pass. Ben is going to play a Pluto Delta of his own and pass back. Jonathan is going to brainstorm on Ben's end step. Let's see if Ben wants to fight this or not.
And so long as there's no clock on the board, Jonathan can probably just hit land drops and bide his time.
So Ben is going to counter the brainstorm with a Spell Pierce, pass the turn to Jonathan. If he can get that Grave Titan on the battlefield, I don't think there's a whole lot that Ben can actually do about it.
Yeah.
Reanimate targeting Grave Titan.
Here's a nice
surgical extraction targeting Grave Titan.
Nice free counterspell. Also gives Ben a chance to see what Jonathan has going on in his hand. So he can line everything up perfectly.
Oh, just 3 lands.
Ooh, yikes.
That is rough.
Wow, Jonathan really wishes that brainstorm
that
resolved.
was a real good brainstorm to snap off there for Ben. Got 2 Verdant Catacombs. Looks like another Tropical Island. Might as well look through Jonathan's deck just to see what else he has. He knows that there's only 1 Grave Titan. Let's see if he changed his boarding up. We got Jaces, Pithing Needles.
It's a little interesting, too, that Ben Friedman fired off a Spell Pierce on that brainstorm. I know that a lot of times I prefer not to fight the cantrips and instead fight the spells that quote-unquote matter. That said, if Ben is a little short on mana and has a lot of counter magic in his hand, if he saves it all, it's unlikely that he's going to be able to fire it off all in one turn. And so firing it off on that brainstorm is a good way of making sure that you're not going to be in a situation where you lose the game with counter spells in your hand because there's one big turn where you couldn't actually cast all of them.
Not only that, but the texture that I'm reading from the game there, where Jonathan doesn't do anything on turn 2 and then brainstorms on his end step, means that this brainstorm has the potential to be more than just a cantrip. It could just be actual Ancestral Recall, getting rid of bad cards that's in his hand.
Yeah.
I'm more hesitant to snap off a Spell Pierce on a Ponder, but anytime I can catch a Brainstorm on a good Spell Pierce, that is just delicious. Brainstorm's such a good card. Not only do you have to play it effectively, and it can dig you out of spots, but it forces your opponent to react to you aggressively, depending on how aggressive you're playing your Brainstorms.
Yeah, it's a great card. One of my favorite things about Legacy is just being able to play Brainstorm.
All right, well, Jonathan is going to pass the turn back to Ben Friedman. He has 3 lands in hand. Ben does still have to try and win the game, though, so let's see if he can find a Tarmogoyf, True Name Nemesis, or something of the like. Looks like there is a True Name on top of his deck, but a bunch of lands. He does have Force of Will already, though, so hand is looking pretty.
Yeah, under normal conditions, Ben wouldn't really want to tap 3 mana for a 3-power threat against Reanimator for fear of essentially getting comboed out while he's tapped out. But since he's seen Jonathan's hand and knows that he's working with so little, the only way Jonathan is really going to put anything together is if he top decks a Brainstorm right away.
So Jonathan is just going to play a Burn Catacombs and pass back to Ben. Ben's going to pick up that True Name Nemesis now. We're going to go ahead and fetch with a Pluto Delta Fall to 17. He's going to go get another dual land since his deck doesn't have any basics. We've got an Underground Sea. I will choose you with my True Name Nemesis, says Ben Friedman, and pass the turn back to Jonathan Morawski. Jonathan appears to be drawing more lands, though.
And we were talking about how Ben chose to play 2 Tarmogoyf and 2 True Name Nemesis instead of 4 Tarmogoyf. And if Ben had multiples in a matchup like this, he would love to keep the True Name Nemesis in his hand to be able to pitch to Force of Will. But in this situation, at least he has the threat rather than all blue cards that are disruption.
All right, True Name's going to crash in for 3, bring Jonathan down to 17. Like we saw last game, the True Name is just not as big of a threat as Tarmogoyf is normally, so it is going to give Jonathan a few draw steps to try and get back in this game. But Ben is sitting real pretty with a Daze of Force of Will and another Brainstorm in his hand, along with a Snapcaster Mage to replay that Extraction if he needs to.
And Jonathan's really catching the bad end of variance here. His deck only has 15 lands, and he's drawn a third of them or more.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
All right, well, we found 2 Delver of Secrets here with this Brainstorm, so Ben is going to be able to greatly increase his clock by leaving a instant or sorcery on top of his deck from that Brainstorm and playing these 2 Delvers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he actually wants the Delvers, though. I think he would probably prefer just to have more disruption, but it looks like he's sensing the weakness in his opponent and is willing to deploy one of them.
Yeah, keeping the other one back as a blue card for Force of Will isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. One of the easiest ways to lose against a combo deck is to deploy too many threats to the board without having enough protection in your hand. You want to have a good mixture. Usually 1 or 2 threats is all you really want.
Yep. All right, Jonathan is going to crack a couple of fetch lands, fall down to 15.
It seems like he's on the hard cast Grizzle Brand plan.
Got to get to 8.
Interestingly enough, he could hard cast a Grave Titan if he had access to one.
Yep. My Ponder is going to flip Delver of Secrets. Ben's going to attack for 6, going to bring Jonathan down to 9. You might just play that other Delver now to threaten lethal next turn if you can set up a flip.
Yeah, that would be a pretty big difference on the clock.
I
wonder if he has any
16.
lightning bolts. A lot of times against Reanimator, I like keeping 1 lightning bolt in. Just because with Reanimate, they can get to such a low life total.
Didn't see any, so it's likely
yeah,
he
didn't
cut
see
them
any.
all.
Yeah, there's a good chance that he did.
It's likely he also cut all of his Abrupt Decays, too.
Mm-hmm. Man, I really wanted to see Jace in this matchup.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Ben has a lot of ways to get rid of it, too.
A lot of times when I see 2 players playing, I always like to ask myself a question that could potentially be answered by the experience. And that was my big question for this one.
Is Jace good in this match?
Yeah, that was my question. I still don't have an answer.
I feel like it would have been real good on turn 2.
Well, I feel that way, but I don't have any proof. You have to test your assumptions. You know what they say about assumptions?
What?
I forget, actually.
So these surgical extractions for Ben have been real good in this match. I wonder if he's played Reanimator very much in this tournament. Thoughtseize is going to take care of the Reanimate. He's going to play a Delver. I assume he left a card on top of his deck with the Ponder to flip the Delver of Secrets.
And that's going to be game. Jonathan just
Jonathan
flooded
is going
out.
to extend the hand.
Yep, he's just got nothing going on. He's a great player, but Ben Friedman is going to be able to finish this day 7-1. And they don't call him Benny Beatdown, but he certainly played the role this match.
So Ben Friedman is going to take this match 2-1 over Jonathan Morawski. 4-color Delver is going to be triumphant over Reanimator. Ben is going to move on to 8-1. Both players are locked for day 2.